Today we're making a French staple dish, Boeuf Bourguignon, only we're making it vegan.
I am Amadeus, and I'm renovating a 13th century chateau. To be all honest with you, it's just a half. And you're watching my vlog about my new life in France.
Welcome back to the Chateau kitchen, everyone. And I hope you enjoyed last week's recipe. If you have missed that, I will link it somewhere up above me. And it was easy to do vegan cream cheese. So today we're actually doing something a bit more intricate, which is already a very French dish, which I veganized. So what we will need for Boeuf Bourguignon is all the things you're seeing here. We will need about 4 carrots, about 150 to 200 grams of mushrooms, which we call champignons de Paris in France. Then you'll need 2 onions, 2 packs of tofu, and also a twig of rosemary and some bay leaves. And if you have thyme, unfortunately my thyme has died in the garden, so I will have to use store-bought one. But if you have fresh thyme, it's better to use fresh thyme. Wow, what a tongue twister. Fresh thyme. And 1 or 2 bottles of wine. I would start off with 1 bottle. If you feel that it needs more, then add more later on. So before we start cooking, I actually thought I'm going to give you a bit of history on Boeuf Bourguignon. Because Boeuf Bourguignon is now a French cuisine staple. It is like a lot of those stew recipes based in the Middle Ages. It was a way of cooking meat to tenderize it, because meat cooks a really long time with a lot of red wine, and the red wine actually starts already almost pre-digesting the meat. I know it sounds a bit gross, but it actually starts tenderizing the meat. We won't have to cook it for so long since we're using tofu. Tofu doesn't need that long to be tender, I guess. I mean, tender is the wrong word for tofu. So it didn't reach French restaurants until 1903, where Auguste Escoffier actually made a recipe and shared his recipe, and then you could order it off the menu of any French restaurant in the country, I guess. So what we'll be starting off with is onions, because onions give taste to any dish, you know? So we are going to prepare our onions and chop them up. They don't need to be too finely chopped, because in the end we are going to use them in a stew, and the stew, through cooking it, it will dissolve the onions a bit. So these kinds of pieces like this are quite fine for this stew. When you're cutting onions or chilies or anything that might disturb your eyes, wash your hands after, because all of us just do this kind of unconscious movements of like touching our faces or touching our eyes, and this might result in some really not so pleasant moments. Next up, we'll be chopping up our champignons, and I'm just cutting off a bit of the foot, and then I'm just trying to cut them up into slices, and then maybe one more time the other way, so that they are a bit smaller. I don't want them too big, because in this dish traditionally you won't find mushrooms. I am using mushrooms to give it a bit of a more umami kind of meaty taste, because mushrooms do sometimes resemble a bit more this umami taste. So by adding mushrooms to your dishes, or mushroom stock for example, that's a great way to add a bit more flavor, this kind of like foresty, woody flavor, you know, what we would call umami, which is kind of the flavor that we also get from soy sauce, from miso paste, all these things. You can do great things with mushrooms, so I really like using mushrooms. I know that some people are allergic to mushrooms, so you need to see. If you are, then don't use mushrooms, obviously. If you aren't, I can only tell you mushrooms are going to be like your go-to in vegan cuisine, because they can just replace so many things, and they taste really well. You can make them into so many different things. I also have a recipe for making ground meat out of a combination of mushrooms and walnuts. We're bringing out the cocotte. So this cocotte is really amazing. And maybe one day, hey, cocotte, do you want to sponsor me? um, their pots and pans are just amazing. I really love them, and I'm really not sponsored in any sort of way by them, but I can only recommend them. They're a bit more on the pricey side, but I'm just like in awe, and there's like no Teflon involved. It's very, very environmentally friendly. So if you're looking for new pots and pans and you're in Europe, I can only recommend these people. Maybe that will be one of the next few recipes. Mushroomy goodness. So now that we have our mushrooms cut up, we can cut up our carrots, about 4 carrots, like I said, and we'll just chop them up. Also, the carrots, I would chop them up in a medium kind of size, not too big, not too small, and just give them a rinse before. If you have doggies, keep the tops and the bottoms for them. They love to crunch on them, and it's really good for their digestion to get some fibers to push everything out. It just sounded really disgusting. I'm sorry, but it really won't harm your dog. So let me just put all our mushrooms in here. And now we have space to chop up our carrots. Already the smells are getting so intense. You can really smell a difference once we make a crossover to the warmer season, that things just get a much more intense smell and taste. Really, you should think about that, because all this, if you already have a very intense smell, you'll probably have quite the intense taste from it as well, and it will add so much flavor to your dish. Just a short excursion on herbs. So if you have the possibility of having garden herbs, it's really fantastic. Rosemary grows in a lot of climate zones, and actually, if your climate zone, I think ours is kind of similar to zone 8 in the States, which means the rosemary grows all year long. It doesn't die because it doesn't really get cold here. It doesn't, temperatures rarely drop below 0. And also the bay leaves are from my neighbor's garden, and she always provides me with them. So you just let them dry, and then you can use them for cooking. I don't have, like I said, thyme, but I'll be using dried thyme. You can find those, if you're living in France, the bouquet garni. Basically, that's what they're called. There's like little kind of dried bouquets with bay leaves and rosemary and thyme all together already, that you can use them for cooking. And another top tip for tofu, I use tofu from Grand Frais. Grand Frais is a French supermarket that's in a market hall style. And I really love their products. They sell really fresh products, lots of things from France and Spain. And I just really love going there. In my eyes, they have the freshest produce, and they do have exotic stuff, which I do not buy, to be all honest. But they do have a good selection of tofus that are kind of firm. In France, it's really hard to find good tofu, and I found these at Grand Frais, and we're buying them like crazy. And they're not super expensive. They are about, you saw, I think in my last vlog, we went shopping to Grand Frais, and they are about €2.70 for 250 grams of tofu, which is fine. If you are close to an Asian store, for example, there's a few Korean brands that are sold all over the world. And what you want is kind of a firm tofu for this. You don't want, I mean, Some tofus are more like spongy firm. You don't want that. You really want still this kind of squishiness. You want to be able to squish it without squishing it too much. So this way you can tear it up into pieces. I'll show you in a bit, and it will be meat-like chunks. We're bringing out the cocotte. So this cocotte is really amazing. And maybe one day, hey, cocotte, do you want to sponsor me? Their pots and pans are just amazing. I really love them, and I'm really not sponsored in any sort of way by them, but I can only recommend them. They're a bit more on the pricey side, but I'm just like in awe, and there's like no Teflon involved. It's very, very environmentally friendly. So if you're looking for new pots and pans and you're in Europe, I can only recommend these people. So let's light up some fire. If we wanted to be super French, we'd be using butter. We're using olive oil. I mean, anyway, it's not like we can use butter. I mean, we could use margarine, but I just don't like it that much. So we're gonna let this heat up a bit, and then we'll be adding our onions and also our bay leaves and rosemary. You want your onion to be translucent. Can you hear the sizzle? I already prepared the tofu, and that's exactly the consistency of tofu that you would want. You want it like squishy. So this way we can just tear it up into pieces, into chunks like this, and just fry them up. But before this happens, we're actually adding our champignon. And your champignon, you really want to fry them up. I don't know even if frying is the right word. You want them to reduce in size about by, I would say, at least 2/3 before you add on the carrot. And now we can also put our thyme in. If I had fresh thyme, I'd be adding it from the get-go. With this one, just add like about 2 tablespoons. It already smells so good. So while our champignons reduce in size, we will open up our wine. I chose a really, really cheap wine. I think this wine was like €2. Don't want to put in like a too good of a wine. I mean, doesn't even have a real cork. It smells alright. It will definitely serve a purpose. We basically don't need a special wine for it. All of these kind of stewy dishes that rely on wine were also invented because you had wine that really didn't taste that well. So that's when you used it for cooking. Can you see how this reduced in size? This is perfect. This is beautiful. So this is the point where we add carrot. Same thing here. We want to have the carrot a bit softer, and then we can start adding the tofu. I am not wanting to fry the tofu up too much because we want it to have this consistency of tender meat. So that's why it's actually like helpful to just put in the tofu a bit later. If I would want the tofu to be a bit more firm, then I'd probably fry it up a bit before, and I would have put it in before the champignon. But like this, I think for this kind of stew, it's exactly the right way to go about. Already now with the carrot, you can smell there's a change of smells because we've added another component. You can already smell it. It already reminds you of this stew smell. So some people would add a bit of tomato paste, you know, like the concentrated tomato. I don't think it really belongs in a very traditional Boeuf Bourguignon, so we are not doing that. we are rather reducing the whole thing with the wine. So I think now the carrots are okay. They have lost a bit of color, so we can add our tofu. And really just, there's no particular way to do it. Just tear it up, throw it in. You know, I think it's really important to just have enjoyment in the kitchen and to experiment, to try to find your own ways. So I find it really hard to tell you exactly like how much I am doing it because obviously it's a recipe that you would want to follow, right? But for me, cooking is a thing of balancing out and trying to find ways to balance things out. And I think the more you cook and the more you actually start experimenting with stuff, you will get a feeling for how much of what needs to be in a dish to make it taste a certain way. And it's totally different than baking. Baking is much more science. It's much more, you really have to do it the way the recipe says, because otherwise you'll end up with a not so pretty outcome. So as I keep saying about umami flavor, this is soy sauce. Gonna add about like 2 tablespoons of soy sauce to give it a bit more richness and depth in flavor. You could think of cooking actually almost like painting. You always need to create a bit more depth, a three-dimensional kind of feeling for cooking. I don't know if you understand what I mean. Stir it a bit up so that your tofu also has a chance to get into that soy sauce. And now comes our final step. We are going to max up the heat a bit. And we are adding the wine. I would add the full bottle of wine. We're starting off like this. Maybe you will need more. Usually, I do not need more than 1 bottle of wine. But you never know. You want it definitely to reduce. And first you want to just cook it with the wine. And then you will add a bit of broth, about like 250 milliliters of broth, so that we get up to 1 liter of overall liquid. So I'm just boiling up some water. Either you have vegetable stock at home or you have one of those broth cubes that I'm using, and one is more than enough. Dissolve it in hot water. This already tells me how much water it is, and then we can add it later on. Not now. First want to bring it a bit to a boil, let the wine do its thing, let the alcohol emit, because through heating it up, the alcohol evaporates from the and just leaves the flavor. We're getting there, we're getting there. Lots of the wine is evaporating, and once you have the feeling that part of the wine is gone, can already smell, still smell the alcohol leaving a bit, but we can already add our broth to it. So we'll leave this cooking about 30 minutes, I would say. Always checking on it, stirring it, trying to see if not too much evaporated. If you feel that it's a bit too much, it's not as liquidy anymore, then you always can add more broth or more wine, whichever it is to your liking. If you don't want to use that much wine, you can just add it up with a bit of broth, and always keep watching it. I prefer covering it with a lid and really reducing the flame. So I think we can reduce the flame even more. And like this, basically it's done. So you see, it's a French staple, but it's also not very hard to do. It's a great dish that can be prepared ahead of time, like I'm doing now. Today is a Saturday. I have my boyfriend's aunt coming for lunch tomorrow, which is Sunday, and we'll be having this for lunch, so it absolutely keeps perfectly. I would say if you put it in a fridge, you're safe with keeping it at up to a week. No problem there. You can serve it in a very simple way with just boiled potatoes. Once you have boiled the potatoes, you add a slice of margarine, for example, and then you sprinkle them with some fresh parsley. That's done. That's all the magic there is to it. Alrighty, this has been cooking for quite a while now. Ooh, oh, if you could smell this. I did add a pinch of salt already, so let's try it. Mm, yeah, that's really good and nice. You have the acidity from the red wine. I would say I would add another pinch of salt, a bit of pepper, and then we can have a look if tomorrow anybody wants something else. I'll just put the pepper on the table. And if you would like it to be a bit more thick, you would not have a very thick sauce for a Boeuf Bourguignon, but some people just like the consistency of a thicker sauce. You could just easily thicken it, take away a part of the sauce, and then add a bit of corn or potato starch and dissolve it in that little part, and then put it all in, bring it to a boil. This way it would thicken up your sauce. I think I'm just gonna leave it like this, and I will turn off the gas. I will just let it sit and we'll enjoy it tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for joining me again in the Chateau kitchen for Chateau Cooking with Amadeus. And I hope you really liked this recipe and I hope you're going to enjoy it. And it was fun bringing you along. I really like this format, I have to say. I really like this transfer of knowledge. I decided that I will make the recipes in a bit of a prettier sheet way, which will be for my Patreons. So the recipes will stay on here on the YouTube, but when you're a patron, you will actually get it on a nice little sheet as a PDF, and then eventually one day you'll have a whole cookbook, I guess. So if you want to join my Patreon, it's €5 a month. You'll have the link down below in the description box. It's not mandatory. I'm just mentioning it. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next vlog or the next cooking episode, whatever you're going to watch. Bisous from the southwest of France. Bye!